Is the most powerful kind of control doesn't look like control. And by the end of this video, you'll see exactly how that works and why it's so easy to miss when you're in the middle of it. My name is Christina, and I help people recover from narcissistic abuse. If you haven't already, go ahead and download my free checklist to see how your personal experience stacks up with the typical phases of narcissistic abuse. All right, so let's break this down, because one of the first ways narcissists keep control and keep you distracted is by creating conflict without ever looking like the one who caused it. So what we're talking about here is how they divide and distract. Narcissists usually don't need to destroy you directly. All they really have to do is turn you against someone else and let you do their dirty work for them. So they stir the pot and they whisper things, or they drop little hints. They might offer little suggestions with just enough poison to shift your energy. And they do it in a way that makes you feel like you came to that conclusion all on your own. And suddenly, you're maybe questioning a friend or side-eyeing your own support system. Maybe you're pulling back from people who might have actually had your back. Because when a narcissist needs power, they don't start with control. They don't start there. They start with confusion. So what happens here is that a narcissist might start with a kernel of truth. If they see a little crack in any facade, right? So say it's a friendship, a very close friendship, and maybe you had an argument and they see that little crack, and that's when they'll come in and they'll start planting these seeds. And this is when they start using your values against you, and they start to prove to you that this person is not on your side and they do not share your same values, right? They might try to convince you that you've grown apart from this person. And it can happen in any kind of relationship, not just a friendship. It often happens in family relationships where the narcissist will isolate someone from their support group. And over time, if you really stop and start paying attention, you can see that you never had so much conflict with people in your lives before the narcissist was around. And suddenly, all of a sudden, there's all of these arguments. And yes, you're blaming yourself for them. You're taking full responsibility for them because it feels like it was your choice. And in a way, it was. But unfortunately, there may have been someone pulling the strings all along. They create just enough friction to make you feel like something's off, but not off enough to know exactly what it is. So you spin. You try to make sense of it, and you fill in the gaps with your own fears and insecurities. And that's the point. They know you're going to do this. Because now, instead of noticing what they're doing, you're too busy trying to keep the peace in your own life. Or maybe you're too busy trying to win a fight or to prove yourself to someone who is not even in the room. How many times have we found ourselves doing this? And listen, all of this manipulation, this is how they stay clean. And it's how they stay in control without actually looking like they're controlling. And what we're talking about here is a system. It's a playbook, and it shows up everywhere, not just in your personal relationships, but you will see it in families where one person manipulates behind the scenes while everyone else walks on eggshells. You'll also see it in communities where blame gets tossed around while the actual cause of the pain stays hidden. And yes, absolutely, you will notice it in much bigger and broader places too. I think you know what I'm getting at. Because when people are fighting against each other, they're not asking the real questions and they're not seeing the bigger game. So the narcissist sits quietly in the middle of the mess they just made, looking innocent and untouched. Sometimes even heroic, like the peacemaker in all of this. But underneath it all, they lit the match. And now they're just watching it all burn. And let's be real, they don't want clarity, they want chaos. And as long as they can keep you emotionally hooked on the wrong enemy, they win. But division is only one part of the strategy. Because once you're isolated, the next move is even more subtle and even more personal. And that's where the narcissist's false morality comes in. And false morality almost always goes hand in hand with manufactured outrage. You see, when a narcissist wants to control you, they don't just go after your weaknesses, they go after your values. So, your kindness, your empathy, your commitment to doing what's right, even when it's hard. They learn what matters to you and what you stand for. And most importantly, what you can't stand in other people. So let's just say one quality that you can't stand in other people is lying. So, of course, everyone tells little white lies, right? There are definitely different scales of liars out here in the world. And if you're someone who maybe can't stand another person who lies for seemingly no reason when they could have just told the truth, this is also going to be something that you rebel against yourself. So you are going to try your hardest not to be the person who lies for no reason. And you're probably going to go to great lengths not to be that person that you can't stand. So you may be more honest than most other people because you truly value the truth so highly. You try to tell the truth even when it's hard. But there are still times where maybe you don't want to answer a question and maybe you don't have to, right? But let's just say the narcissist is asking you something you don't want to talk about. The simple, I don't want to talk about this right now, or this is a subject I really don't want to talk about. Instead of respecting your boundaries, what they'll do is they will use your values against you. So they'll convince you that not sharing this thing that is really none of their business is the same thing as a lie. And this is how they start to break down your boundaries and they start to get you to second guess yourself. Because all along you considered yourself an extremely honest person. And so would anyone else who knows you. But yet they find little cracks in your sense of self and they exploit them. They rip them wide open. So before long, you're questioning whether you're a hypocrite. Maybe you lie more often than you thought you did, or maybe other people think so too. And this is that sense of false morality. The narcissist in this scenario is acting like they also hate lies when you probably know, if you know this person, you've probably caught them in many lies. But because you have such a strong resistance to telling lies yourself, it's so much easier for them to convince you that you've lied when you were not open and forthcoming. And this is why having boundaries is so important and understanding how to keep them, especially around someone who is so manipulative. Because in the narcissist's lies, saying no makes you selfish, needing space makes you cold, and not replying fast enough makes you mean. And speaking the truth, of course, it makes you a liar. But it's not just the label that hurts, it's what that label represents. Because now they've made you feel like you're becoming the kind of person you can't stand. Maybe even the kind of person they already turned you against. And if that's happened in your life, it's not an accident, it's a strategy. So what happens now is you pull back, you over explain, or you stay silent just to prove to yourself and to them that you're still a good person. But here's the part that cuts the deepest. You start to lose your grip on who you really are. You stop trusting your gut because every time you speak up, it feels like you're betraying the identity you've worked so hard to live up to. And once they've distorted your values like that, they don't have to yell or fight. You'll do all the heavy lifting for them. So you'll self police. You'll sacrifice your peace just to avoid becoming the person they made you believe you were turning into. Because when you're caught between being true to yourself and proving you're not the villain, they win. So they definitely create two sides, and you have to pick one. So either you pick the side of good or you pick the side of evil. And the lines get really blurred along the way. And you consistently always try your best to pick the side of good. But as the lines get blurred, sometimes you're not really sure which side you're on, or even what you're fighting for. This is what narcissists do. They use your highest values as weapons, and they turn your kindness into compliance. So if you've ever felt like standing up for yourself makes you the bad guy, if you've pulled away from your own truth to avoid looking like the enemy, it's not because you're broken. It's because you were manipulated. And once you see it, once you really see it, you don't just get your power back, you get your identity back. Now, the next piece of this is just as disorienting because once you've stepped out of the role they gave you, you start to see who the real enemy was all along. And the real enemy is never who you think. So, one of the hardest parts about waking up from narcissistic abuse is realizing the person you were defending yourself against wasn't actually the problem. And in some cases, hey, maybe they were problematic, but they weren't the one wreaking havoc in your life. So we're talking about the friend that you cut off, or the sibling that you snapped at. Or we could be talking about the version of yourself that you turned against in order to make this work. So none of these things were the true enemy. And if we're talking about other people externally, they may have just been reacting to the same manipulation, but from a different angle. And while you were fighting them, the narcissist was standing quietly in the middle, playing both sides and feeding each fire just enough to keep it going. Because when people are angry, they don't look too closely at where that anger started. And if you think about it in your own life, it's true, right? If you're having a really bad day and someone cuts you off in traffic, your anger is fully focused on that person. And you're not thinking about the 100 other things that happened that made you upset that day. It is all 100% focused on that person, that situation in the present moment. And the narcissist knows this. As long as they can get you fired up and point you in a different direction, off you go. And this is why the narcissist is always happy to offer a scapegoat. So while you're trying to untangle what's real and what's not, they're out of the spotlight. They're clean. And that's exactly how they stay in power. Because if you ever turned around and asked the right question, why did we even start fighting in the first place? The whole thing would unravel. And that's the moment they fear the most. The moment people stop fighting and start talking. The moment you realize the person you were taught to hate isn't the one who's been hurting you. And the narcissist has known all along. And so the conflict stays alive. Because as long as you're defending something, yourself, your side, your story, you're not going to be seeing the bigger picture. But once that fog clears, once the pattern clicks into place, everything shifts. You stop arguing, and maybe you start remembering who you were before they handed you a script. And that right there is the moment that the whole system starts to fall apart. Not with a fight, but with clarity. And unfortunately, that clarity will bring you to the next trap, because once you've stepped out of the confusion, there's still one more thing keeping you hooked: the side you chose while you were in it. And here's why picking a side is the trap. If you have ever been a flying monkey for a narcissist, you know this very well. So, of course, there's nothing wrong with standing up for something, nothing wrong with having values and speaking out or taking action. But the moment your values feel more like an obligation than a choice, you've got to ask who handed them to you. Because if they were your own, they would not feel like such an obligation. But that's exactly how they hook you, by turning your identity into a role. Who you are could be free and fluid. Who you hang out with could change based on how you're feeling or your own interactions with those people. But narcissists really like to control those things. And in order to get you on their side, they've got to use your values against you. So they have to convince you that on your terms, this person is bad. So instead of controlling you through fear or guilt, which they'll also do, in a case like this where they're asking you to pick sides, they're handing you a script. And they tell you who the bad guy is and what you should believe. Because that moment when you pick a side, you stop seeing nuance and you stop checking in with yourself. Because now you've got a role to play. It's me against this person. I can't stand this person. They are the enemy. And once you've made your mind up about that, even if somebody convinced you of it, once you've made your mind up, it's really difficult to change it. So now your identity is tied up in being on the right side. And anything that threatens that feels like a personal attack. And if you're paying attention, you might be seeing the bigger picture right now. But this doesn't only show up in politics or culture wars, it shows up in relationships too. So maybe your ex made you feel like you had to prove that you were loyal to them. And the only way you could do this was by turning against someone else. Or maybe they convinced you that your friends were toxic, that your therapist didn't understand you, or that your family didn't care. So you picked a side. You picked them. And at the time, it felt like standing up for your values. It felt like standing up maybe for your independence. But looking back, it wasn't your truth. It was a choice you made to keep the peace or to keep safe, or maybe just to feel like you belong, to feel loved and appreciated. But let's be real, the more emotionally charged the situation, the easier it is to confuse survival with alignment. So first, maybe you step in and you think, okay, this feels aligned. It feels aligned with me and who I am. And of course, someone is in your ear telling you that it is and convincing you that it is. So you go ahead and you pick a side. But over time, things shift and they change. And maybe you're starting to have doubts about the person, or you're not feeling as aligned with that decision as you once were. So you're walking around with an inner conflict, but to go ahead and change that decision is a massive undertaking. And the narcissist who had a hand in that decision to begin with is going to make you feel like you're betraying yourself if you're no longer aligned with the side you chose. So listen, the problem here isn't having strong values. The problem is when those values are hijacked for someone else's personal gain. Because the narcissist doesn't care what you believe, as long as what you believe keeps you where they want you. So the work isn't to shut down or to stay neutral. The work is to strip away all the noise and ask, is this really me? And when the answer is yes, when it's your truth, you'll know because it won't feel like panic. It won't feel like proving or defending. It'll feel like peace and clarity. You won't have to defend your position to anyone because you know that it's true in your heart. You're aligned with it. And I also want to point out something that I think many of us have forgotten. You don't have to pick a side to stand firm in your values. And you don't need someone else's approval to walk away from something that stopped making sense a long time ago. So, all the stuff we're talking about is a big part of how narcissists keep control, not just by lying or manipulating or love bombing, but by creating confusion. Confusion about who you are, confusion about what's right, and confusion about who the real enemy even is. And when you're stuck in that confusion long enough, you stop asking the bigger questions. You just try to survive, to keep the peace, and to avoid becoming the bad guy. But the confusion, it wasn't random. It was actually the point of all of this. Because the longer you're spinning, the less likely you are to notice what's really going on. So you pick a side and you cling to whatever version of the truth helps you feel safe. And it works for a while. That is, until you find yourself defending things that don't quite sit right with you. Until you look in the mirror and realize that you've become disconnected from who you actually are. And that's when the fog starts to lift. Not because someone gave you a better argument, but because something inside you just got quiet enough to hear the truth again. The story you were handed was only ever designed to keep you from writing your own. So here's the part they don't want you to know. You're allowed to change. And when you do, they lose control. But there's one more piece to this puzzle that most people never talk about. Why the narcissist seems to hate you most when you're kind, calm, and grounded in your truth. In the next video, we're going to break that down and you'll finally understand the real reason for their rage. And I'll give a little spoiler here. It has to do with a part of themselves they've been running from their entire lives. So click the video that just popped up on the screen. But before you go, be sure to hit that like button if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time.